and more science is not religion.
By the way, I want to preempt that answer for religion. That's exactly the answer to bad religion, or poor religion, or failed religion, is more religion, instead of saying that religion ought to be banished because, for example, people think mistakenly that good religion is flying planes into buildings. But I also think that the way that you set it up at the beginning is not the way that it used to be or that it has to be. That is, science and religion weren't classically in opposition, except in certain specific instances. And even those instances are much more complicated than we suspect. You know, Galileo and the Pope Urban were friends. And there is a friendship issue as well as a lot of political issues that were involved in Galileo's eventual recantation. It wasn't just there was faith over here and there was Galileo over there, when in fact there were people in the church who agreed with Galileo. And Newton was a devout Christian, as you may know. And the relation between science and religion wasn't classically just oppositional. It was sometimes oppositional, but more often synergistic, and people believed that they coexisted as they should. Forget the pre-state world, where cultural anthropologists tell us that about 1 in every 4 men died of violent death. And then you had pre-monotheistic regimes like Assyria, Babylonia, which were savage beyond the imagination of anything you will find in the Bible or anywhere else. And then, all of a sudden, when it became possible for there to be a regime without a religion, and you know when that became possible, right? That became possible in the French Revolution. That was when it first became possible to not have a religion. Now, is it just an extraordinary coincidence that genocide started to enter the modern world, first with the bloodbath that followed the French Revolution, then with the Napoleonic Wars, that the worst war that ever happened in this country, the Civil War, was not a religious war, that when you had regimes, whatever you want to call them, that explicitly rejected religion, you had Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, I mean, I could go on and on and on. It just seems to me an extraordinary coincidence, far beyond the possibility of believing, to say that no, what was wrong with all these regimes is that they didn't think like Sam Harris. Because it's true, they didn't think like Sam Harris. But the values that you take with skeptical inquiry.
Let me ask a question that deals with, change gears on you guys.
Yeah.
Question that deals with human creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Religion has inspired a lot of great works. Look at world of music, the visual arts. Okay, let's just for a second say the world comes over to your way of thinking.
Right.
How does that affect the arts? Music, literature, The Simpsons.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. What would that
the
creative world be
yeah.
without that?
I think it's a false fear. The idea that we wouldn't find any reason to build beautiful architecture or paint nice paintings, but for indulging certain religious superstitions. It's just not. I think Feynman once wrote that he was a poor poet who must fall silent when he finds out that the sun is actually a massive sphere of hydrogen fusing into helium. I mean, it's not. The claim is that you have to take something on faith to be creative, and I think it's a product. And there will be right and wrong answers, and we'll find, for instance, that honor killing is a bad strategy if you want to raise compassionate men. We know that already, but at some point we will know this biochemically.
What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I can think of a couple of examples, although I don't think that that's crucial. But for example, Marxism, which was the scientific study of societies and was thought of as a science.
Nobody thinks that's science.
Nobody thinks it is now. You said an answer now that people once thought was scientific but no longer do. That's a good example.
Oh, no, but
a religious answer.
Let me just clarify my question.
But a religious answer to life is much better now than this poor science that was Marxism, or for that matter, I would say, than the not very good science that was Freudianism. But go ahead.
Well, I agree on both counts. It's just that the point to make is that the antidote to bad science or failed science or scientific incompleteness is good science and more science. It's not religion.
By the way, I want to preempt that answer for religion. That's exactly the answer to bad religion or poor religion or failed religion is more religion, instead of saying that religion ought to be banished because, for example, people think mistakenly that good religion is flying planes into buildings. But I also think that the way that you set it up at the beginning is not the way that it used to be or that it has to be. That is, science and religion weren't classically in opposition, except in certain specific instances. And even those instances are much more complicated than we suspect. You know, Galileo and the Pope Urban were friends. And there is a friendship issue as well as a lot of political issues that were involved in Galileo's eventual recantation. It wasn't just there was faith over here and there was Galileo over there, when in fact there were people in the church who agreed with Galileo. And Newton was a devout Christian, as you may know. And the relation between science and religion wasn't classically just oppositional. It was sometimes oppositional, but more often synergistic. And people believed that they coexisted, as they should. But you can't answer the question of what's a good life scientifically. You can't.
Why not?
I can say what will make you feel a certain way. But whether that's good, let me give you an example. You talked about happiness. There are some people who've lived very unhappy lives that religiously you would evaluate as very good lives. I mean, Rabbi Akiva at the end of his life was not happy. Right? I mean, he was martyred. But if you were to bring Rabbi Akiva back to life and say, would you say that the end of your life was good or bad? He would say, I have no doubt, painful but good. And if you said to him, but what about scientifically? He would say, well, scientifically I was being burned alive. But you can't evaluate my life scientifically. And in fact, I just want to give one little sermonic coda here. Anybody, just one. Yeah. Just one for the moment. Okay. How could you know me so quickly? Anybody who has children or who believes that they're doing something important in this world, or who works in difficult circumstances to bring water to villages or food to hungry people, would say that the idea that you could scientifically demonstrate a good life is worse than empty. It's a mockery.
Okay, well that's good. I see that the term happiness is a little too effete to capture what I'm after here. I'm talking about well-being. I'm talking about all of the factors that we recognize that correspond to the good life. And I'm certainly open to the possibility that we have yet to fully characterize the good life religiously, philosophically, and certainly scientifically. I mean, this is an open conversation. The question is, do you ever have to believe anything on insufficient evidence to explore this terrain, to become truly...
and what is sufficient evidence?
Well, it's the kind of evidence everyone in this room demands on any subject other than religion. I mean, there are nuances here. It takes a lot of work to rise to the standard of scientific evidence, but science is the one language game we are playing where we get really straight and rigorous about what constitutes evidence, where there's a process of peer review, where you have a lot of smart people trying to prove you wrong, and where you actually win points by proving yourself wrong. I mean, this is not what religions are up to. Religions are not falsifiable in this way. And I think you used a phrase that I thought was very useful to frame this. You talked about what used to be and what must be, I think was your phrase. And I think we should reflect on what used to be, because our religions come to us out of a tradition, in many cases, of human sacrifice. I mean, a human sacrifice was virtually a cultural universal. This is where we come from. These are the roots of religion. It's been by no means rare for a child to be born into this world only to find that he's being raised by religious maniacs who think that the best way to keep the sun on its course or to cure the king's venereal disease is to bury or butcher or burn him alive as an offering to an imaginary god. This is not just the Aztecs. This is the ancient Hebrews. Human sacrifice is in the Hebrew Bible, at times condemned, at times tacitly supported, at times demanded, and then, as you know in the story of Abraham, the demand is recanted. We come from tradition, from generations of people.
Sam Harris argues that we don't need faith to find truth. History shows that when ideas fail, they collapse under evidence. Marxism called itself a science of history and fell apart. Freud declared his theories biological fact, yet they remain stories, not science. What replaced them was evidence, testing, and the courage to admit mistakes. Religion resists this process. It elevates authority, shields ignorance, and sanctifies error as virtue. Rabbi David Wolpe says religion provides meaning, pointing to Rabbi Akiva, who accepted torture and death as fulfillment. That is the danger. When obedience is treated as goodness, suffering becomes holy. Human sacrifice was once nearly universal. Aztec priests cut out hearts for the gods. The Hebrew Bible records Jephthah's daughter given as an offering, and Abraham prepared to kill Isaac in the name of faith. These were not hidden. They were central to the religious imagination. Human flourishing comes from evidence. Neuroscience shows compassion and cooperation in the brain. Public health and education records demonstrate that equality, rights, and knowledge raise well-being. Progress came from inquiry and doubt, not from doctrines that demanded blood.
Were doing what they did because of atheism, because of non-belief in God. I mean, ask yourself, is too much skeptical inquiry really what's wrong with North Korea? I mean, the North Koreans are a cargo cult armed with nuclear weapons right now. They think that the food aid that we give them is a devotional offering to the genius of their dear leader. They are systematically impoverished, both physically and in terms of information. Too much knowledge, any knowledge is too much knowledge in North Korea. This is not a paradise of reasonableness. Now, all I'm advocating is that we use the same standards of rationality that we use in every other area of our lives when people start making claims about the divine origin of certain books and the virgin birth of certain people and the glorious end to history where the good people will be raptured into the sky. These are the kinds of things that we should apply pressure to. And it is taboo to apply pressure to these claims, and religious moderation, unfortunately, ramifies that taboo.
Okay, so first of all, it's hardly taboo. I mean, 3 million books may not be a lot in your litany of bestsellers, but it's a lot of books, and I don't think that it's certainly in our society and in Europe it's not taboo to preach atheism. More books are poured forth every day. But here's the question. I do want you to look actually at the historical record. Let's just take the Western monotheistic faiths, okay? Before they existed, think about the world. I forget the pre-state world, where cultural anthropologists tell us that about 1 in every 4 men died of violent death. And then you had pre-monotheistic regimes like Assyria, Babylonia, which were savage beyond the imagination of anything you will find in the Bible or anywhere else. And then, all of a sudden, when it became possible for there to be a regime without a religion, and you know when that became possible, right? That became possible in the French Revolution. That was when it first became possible to not have a religion. Now, is it just an extraordinary coincidence that genocide started to enter the modern world, first with the bloodbath that followed the French Revolution, then with the Napoleonic Wars, that the worst war that ever happened in this country, the Civil War, was not a religious war, that when you had regimes, whatever you want to call them, that explicitly rejected religion, you had Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, I mean, I could go on and on and on. It just seems to me an extraordinary coincidence, far beyond the possibility of believing, to say that, no, what was wrong with all these regimes is that they didn't think like Sam Harris. Because it's true, they didn't think like Sam Harris. But the values that you take with skeptical inquiry are values that, in fact, were taken from the religious regimes that you find unpalatable and that were
No.
rejected by all these regimes that were genocidal, including, of course, the worst from the point of view of any single country, which was Hitler, Mao, and Stalin.
Okay, there are a few claims there that we have to shelve. One is this idea that you just claim that I got my morality from a religious tradition. Ask yourself, when you pick up the Bible or the Hebrew Bible or any holy book and find ethical wisdom in there, what is that process like? I mean, you pick up Leviticus or Deuteronomy, and you find that if a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night, you're supposed to stone her to death on her father's doorstep. Okay, presumably you choose to reject that pearl of ancient wisdom. And then you find another line, I think this is also in Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself. Or the golden rule, as preached in the New Testament. And this resonates with you as a good operating premise to generate further moral intuitions. If nothing else, it's a good ideal to live toward. Now, that process, the guarantor of your morality in that case is not the book. It's in your brain. And this kind of truth testing is something that we bring to religion. Now, religion does a lot of work on people, and you can get good people to believe some very terrible things in the name of God, and this is what worries me about religion. And I think we waste time talking about Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot, frankly, because these were political religions. These were dogmatisms through and through, and when anyone started to make too much sense in opposition to these dogmatisms, they were carted off and killed. These were not contexts in which rational discourse prevailed and the best idea won. So to call them science is just to misuse the term. And it's, I mean, in the case of Hitler, it's just a total non sequitur, because Hitler never really repudiated Jesus, and he used Jesus in his speech, and he was facilitated by 1,000 years of religious fulminating against the Jews in the name of Christianity. I mean, religion is implicated, certainly, in the Holocaust. So it's not, I think, a conversation worth having.
I'm sorry, I brought a quote. This is from Viktor Frankl, who is a survivor and a therapist. This book, The Doctor and the Soul. The gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of a theory that man is nothing but the product of heredity and environment, or as the Nazis like to say, of blood and soil. I'm absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and in lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers.
Okay, well that is an opinion that I think we can all reject on its face.
Really?
Clearly. Do you really think you think Auschwitz is the result
absolutely.
of
I
thinking
think
too
that the
clearly about the
rejection,
physical world?
yes, the rejection of transcendence and the idea that human beings are all heredity and environment and breeding and eugenics and social Darwinism was absolutely a much greater contributor than the
hatred of Jews?
Than the rejected Christianity. Well, it wasn't just the destruction of the Jewish people. It was, don't forget, World War II, right? This was much wider than the hatred of one people. But yes, why was it focused on the Jews? In part because the explanation that Hitler gave wasn't theological. The explanation that he gave was racial. Had it been theological, I would say yes, theological. But strikingly,
But weren't the
all
roots
these
theological, though?
The history of anti-Semitism.
there was a long history of anti-Semitism, but why did it never explode into genocide in a Christian government?
It was, first of all, the history of the Jews in Europe is a history punctuated by rather ceaselessly by pogroms and murder that was explicitly religious. I mean, you have something like host desecration.
Yes.
I don't know if you know about this phenomenon that I came across while researching my first book. The communion host is thought to be, once blessed, is thought to actually physically be the body of Jesus, and therefore, if it's mistreated, this is, you can literally, in torturing a cracker, you are torturing the body of Jesus. There are accounts of whole villages purged of Jews who were accused of having mistreated crackers. So the question is, does the belief in the transubstantiation, which is a belief that I would have thought could be rather harmless, have anything to do with the idea that someone can mistreat a cracker and that you should kill him for it? Yes, it does have something to do. It's impossible to believe in the torture of crackers unless you think transubstantiation is a fact.
But what it's not impossible to believe in is the torture of one group by another. And that is, as you know, virtually universal in human history.
And it's given immense energy by religious hatred.
The question arises, in what sort of regime are you likely to be able to get a society a la America where that is minimized? And it seems to me quite clear that if you look through history, although the depredations of religion, we could spend all night talking about the terrible things that have happened in the name of religion, but that would have much more power if you took essentially good people and made them rotten, as opposed to taking people who are predisposed to both good and evil actions and given them distinct identities one from the other. Nation states, religions, neighborhoods, so on. And what you get, almost inevitably, is the action of one group against the other. And in fact, the only transcendent idea that I can think of that really does tie one person to another is God. Which is why, when you actually filter that book through a person, as opposed to, say, just opening Deuteronomy, which no tradition that I know of suggests is a way to learn morality, but when you filter it through a person, you get someone like Isaiah, who criticizes Jews on the basis of the Bible that he knows far better than we, or Hillel, who, when he's asked to summarize an entire tradition, knowing it intimately and intricately, doesn't say, go persecute someone. He says, what's hateful to you, don't do to someone else. Because even though you can cherry-pick lines that are both funny and destructive.
Sam Harris begins with North Korea. He calls it what it is, not atheism, but a political cult. The regime treats its leader as a god, interprets foreign aid as sacred tribute, and suppresses information with religious zeal. This isn't skepticism. It's dogma in pure form, rituals, sacred texts, and punishment of heresy. History shows that whenever authority becomes untouchable, whether in Pyongyang or medieval Rome, atrocities follow. Rabbi David Wolpe counters by pointing to the French Revolution, Stalin, Mao, and Hitler. But the record doesn't match the claim. The French Revolution was political collapse, not the fruit of rational inquiry. Stalin and Mao enforced obedience through personality cults, complete with hymns, sacred texts, and enforced orthodoxy. These were religions without gods. And Hitler? He never renounced Christianity. He invoked Jesus as a warrior against Jews and drew strength from centuries of Christian anti-Semitism. The blood libels, the Inquisition, the expulsion of Jews from Spain, the pogroms across Europe, all carried out in the name of faith, prepared the ground for the Holocaust. Christopher Hitchens cuts to the heart of it. When people claim the Bible is moral, they are already filtering it with their own judgment. Leviticus demands the stoning of non-virgins and execution of gay men. Exodus condones slavery and instructs how to beat servants without penalty. The New Testament tells slaves to obey their masters. Yet people praise, love thy neighbor, and ignore the rest. That selective reading proves morality comes from human reason, not scripture. History confirms it. Hammurabi's code, predating the Bible, outlawed theft and protected widows and orphans. Greek and Roman philosophers debated justice, democracy, and dignity centuries before Christianity. The Stoics taught universal brotherhood and moral duty without divine revelation. Rabbi Bradley Shevit-Artson claims Scripture inspires goodness. But history records crusaders massacring entire cities while chanting Bible verses, conquistadors enslaving indigenous peoples with papal blessing, and popes defending the Atlantic slave trade. These weren't distortions, they were mainstream practice. Even marital rape was legal in most Christian societies until the late 20th century, defended on the doctrine that wives owed sex to husbands. Progress came not through obedience but resistance. Abolitionists, suffragists, and Enlightenment thinkers, Voltaire, Spinoza, Paine, who challenged divine authority and rooted human rights in reason and experience. The Enlightenment also pushed reforms: the abolition of judicial torture, declarations of press freedom, and the spread of secular education. Modern secular societies prove the point further. Nations like Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, among the least religious on earth, rank highest in education, equality, and overall well-being. The evidence is overwhelming. Morality is not revealed. It's built through empathy, reason, and centuries of struggle against dogma. The real danger is not disbelief but blind obedience. And the question remains: do we want ethics that demand silence, or morality that grows stronger every time it is tested?
To assume that even rudimentary material has consciousness because he can't explain how consciousness arises.
Right.
My experience of religious human beings and the way they live and the fact that they live in harmony, to my perception, with an invisible order that gives them a life of a certain sanctity and holiness.
This is a general claim. Religious human beings generally live in harmony with...
No, I said my experience of certain human beings. I mean, I can keep going if you want me to keep going.
Well, no, I think you've put enough on the table.
Okay, but none of those are scientific evidence.
Many of those claims trespass upon the territory of science overtly. I mean, the claim about your understanding other human beings being suggestive of a divine artificer.
Is that a scientific claim?
Absolutely.
Extraordinary.
I mean, is your understanding of mathematics also suggestive of a divine artificer?
No, it has to do with my experience.
Your ability to learn language?
Do you understand? It has to do with my experience of you. When I'm looking at you right now,
Right.
you may assume that what I see is a material, but that's not what I see. And it's not what I believe. And I think that
I
there's
understand
something,
it's not what you
there's
believe, but
something in you that is more than you believe. I really think so.
This is
Now, if you want to make that a scientific claim, you can. But I'm telling you, it's a metaphysical claim, and to confuse the two is a mistake.
Okay, you can add any metaphysics you want.
Thank you.
In that, by that means. I mean, I can say, I see you as a reincarnate personality, and I think you were probably
I was someone famous
on Atlantis. Yes.
Right. Don't make me like a washerwoman in a previous
People
life.
people do this all the time. I mean, you can broadcast. I mean, this is constrained by our common sense in every other domain of discourse. I mean, just take, for example, the people who think Elvis is still alive. Okay, what's wrong with this claim? I mean, why is this claim not vitiating our academic departments and corporations? I mean, I'll tell you why, and it's very simple. We have not passed laws against believing Elvis is still alive. The problem is that whenever somebody seriously represents his belief that Elvis is still alive, in a conversation, on a first date, at a lecture, at a job interview, he immediately pays a price.
Yes.
He pays a price in ill-concealed laughter.
Right.
Now, surely you can agree with him on that.
That is a good thing. Now, then he could rattle on about this is not a scientific claim. This is a matter of faith. You know, when I look at you, I see you. You might be Elvis. I mean, he could do this.
Except that, you know, this is like I mean, almost all the books. I don't believe it's in your book, to your credit, but the Bertrand Russell teapot analogy, right, which Dawkins is so fond of, that there might be a celestial teapot circling the globe.
I think it's in my book too.
Is it? Shame on you. If you make a claim about the existence of a physical entity like Elvis or a teapot, yes, that is evaluated the way you evaluate any other physical entity. That's why I keep saying, and I will say it again, that it is not a scientific claim to say that I believe you have a soul or that God exists. If it were a scientific claim, then you would be able to evaluate it the same way you could get a telescope and look for a teapot. But you can't.
Let me ask you a question that deals with, change gears on you guys here.
Yeah.
A question that deals with human creativity. Okay. Religion has inspired a lot of great works. Look at the world of music, the visual arts. Okay, let's just, for a second, say the world comes over to your way of thinking.
Right.
How does that affect the arts? Music, literature, The Simpsons. You know, I'm just curious. What would the creative world be without that?
I think it's a false fear. The idea that we wouldn't find any reason to build beautiful architecture or paint nice paintings, but for indulging certain religious superstitions. It's just not. I think Feynman once wrote that he was a poor poet who must fall silent when he finds out that the sun is actually a massive sphere of hydrogen fusing into helium. I mean, it's not. The claim is that you have to take something on faith to be creative, and I think it's a product of an argument that you used briefly early on, which is a fallacious one. This idea that the percentages of people who do these great, I think you used it in the connection
in terms of goodness, not in terms of art.
Yeah, in terms of goodness.
Right.
Most people.
Was it not fallacious in goodness?
Yeah.
I'm just
well, yeah,
curious.
no, it's
that
fallacious.
one too. Okay.
Most people are doing this good work are doing it for religious reasons. Well, most people, most of the time, have been religious throughout human history. There has been no one else to do the job. This is true.
Yeah.
I mean, most people who have plucked chickens have plucked them while believing in God. That does not mean you need to believe in God to pluck a chicken.
That is precisely why. That is precisely why it's important to look at the 20th century and the 19th century, when it was possible to have societies that didn't believe in God, and to see what happened.
But you have
and
to
when
look
I
at what
did
else
that,
they
you said,
believed in.
when I did that, you said, but they didn't believe what I believe. And what I'm saying is that if
very
you had
few people do believe what you believe. Apparently.
no, I being Sam Harris here, not what David Wolpe, believe.
well,
You said, when I said Napoleon, the French Terror, the Civil War, Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, all these, as soon as it became possible to have non-religious regimes, look what happened to the world. You said, but what about people who believe what I do? And what I'm saying to you is that thus far in the world, extraordinarily enough, when you remove religion from a society, it is not ruled by Sam Harris's. That's not the way it seems to work. Now, you'll tell me this is a utilitarian argument, and indeed it is. This doesn't prove that religion is true, but it certainly does prove that there is a values vacuum in societies when you suck religion out of it or force it out that is, to my way of thinking, terrifying.
It does not prove that simply because you have to look at what else these people believe. There is a values vacuum in religion. There's a values vacuum in an organization like the Catholic Church that preaches the sinfulness of condom use in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay, there's a values vacuum in that
Right.
same institution that shelters its pedophile priests.
Yeah.
Literally an army of child rapists,
Yes.
based on its own intent upon maintaining its integrity as a religious institution. There's a values vacuum in, and I could go on. And it's not like
Right.
religion is this perfect advertisement for the kinds of values you get once you believe that your book is
Nope, it
dictated
is,
by the creator
it
of
is
the
an
universe.
it is an imperfect institution that is adopted by imperfect people in an imperfect world. And if you expect that it's going to be perfect, then you will be consistently disappointed. And that's why every religion that I know of emphasizes the fact that goodness is a continual and often failed struggle. And
As does science.
One would expect that science doesn't emphasize that goodness is a continual but failed struggle, right? I mean, certain scientists may, but science as a whole doesn't say anything about the metaphysical nature of human goodness. And by the way, Richard Feynman said explicitly that science and religion ought to be able to coexist. So I'm glad that you quoted him, because that lets me
I'm
get
gonna
that little
interrupt now.
appercue in.
Yes.
I'm going to step in here now. I'm getting the signal over there that, do we have the microphone available for questions? Where's Gadi? Do we have someone on this side who has a question? Yes, please.
Rabbi Wolpe, at the beginning of this discussion, Sam Harris talked about the Bible and how human sacrifice is pervasive in the Bible, and how the ancient Hebrews practiced it, but you didn't respond to that.
No.
And I wonder what your response would be.
Sure. I didn't say that it was pervasive. Don't want to. The answer is that human sacrifice was pervasive around the the civilization of the Bible. And in fact, Gehenna, which is the Hebrew word for hell, is based on the fact that in the valley outside Jerusalem, that's where the pagan peoples around the Israelites did sacrifice children, which gives you some sense of the meaning of sacrificing children in Hebrew tradition. Jephthah was the only one who actually sacrificed a child and is condemned by it all through Jewish literature. Abraham, the point of the Abraham story, according to many commentators, which I take to be, is precisely to say that although the gods of the world up to that time do demand human sacrifice, God doesn't, which is why, as the psychologist Eric Wellish says, the key phrase in that story is, don't raise your hand against the boy or do anything to him. Right? That's what the angel says to Abraham when Abraham raises the knife. And that's the key message. So to say that that either the Hebrew people, the Israelite people, or the Bible advocates human sacrifice, and I'm not putting that in your mouth, but to suggest that is it's just a travesty of the Bible.
Well, I'd add a few codas there. The picture is not quite that rosy. First of all, the Abraham story does not end with any resolute condemnation of human sacrifice. There are a few lines where God condemns human sacrifice in Deuteronomy and elsewhere.
Sam makes a simple but vital point. Personal feelings of holiness aren't evidence of truth. We don't take Elvis sightings or claims about Atlantis seriously just because someone insists they feel it. Yet when the same logic is applied to God, it gets a free pass. That's not a different category of knowledge. That's just belief treated as untouchable. And when those beliefs spill into morality, the results speak for themselves. The Bible doesn't give us timeless ethics. It gives us rules to stone disobedient children, to enslave foreigners, to silence women, and to slaughter whole villages by divine command. If people find love your neighbor in the same pages, it's because they're already filtering the text with their own moral sense. The book isn't the source, human judgment is. Rabbi Wolpe warns that removing religion leaves a values vacuum, pointing to Stalin and Hitler. But those regimes weren't grounded in free thought. They were political cults, complete with sacred texts, enforced dogma, and punishment for heresy. That's religion by another name. And history shows religion itself has fueled wars, pogroms, crusades, witch trials, and child abuse scandals while insisting it was defending the good. That isn't a vacuum of values. It's proof that dogma corrupts them. Even the claim that Scripture rejected human sacrifice falls apart under the text. Judges tells of Jephthah killing his daughter to fulfill a vow. Abraham is praised for raising the knife over Isaac. Obedience, not compassion, is the lesson. These stories weren't hidden. They shaped centuries of justification for cruelty in God's name. The record is clear. Progress came not from blind faith, but from people willing to question it. The real test is simple. Should our moral life be ruled by belief or by evidence we can actually trust? How do you see it? Do you believe religion is key to moral values, or can we build ethics and compassion independently? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this got you ideas, be sure to like, subscribe, and share to keep the conversation going.